y estar por conectarse también.
¿Podemos hacer una última prueba, Jenny? Y mostrar el video. Y mostrarme el video para verlo en YouTube. Yo voy a entrar inmediatamente para ver qué tal la calidad de... Porque tú sabes, en YouTube se pierde aún más la calidad todavía. Ahí nos vemos.
Don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make
Ya, lo voy a compartir ahora para que probemos, ¿ya?
Hay un después, así que tenemos que esperar unos 30 segundos más.
Probemos y si no lo comparto yo, Jenny, no tengo ningún problema.
Ya leo.
Descargando por...
¿Se ve ahora la presentación?
Se ve, sí.
El video...
El tema son los subtítulos. Dale nomás con play un poco más adelante.
Seba, te pido un favor, podí, si quizás paramos la música. Espérame, voy a... Ahí sí. Ya, ahí sí. Y probemos ahora cómo se escucha.
Buenas noches, everyone. Hello. Lovely to be with you this evening.
Acá se ve bien. Estoy esperando la transmisión en YouTube y les cuento.
To present this.
Sí, se ve muy bien. Buenas noches a todos. Hola. Es un placer estar con ustedes esta tarde. Perfecto. En YouTube.
¿Quién dice buenas noches a todos? Buenas noches para quien esté saludando. Cariños Natacha, que saluda desde Montevideo. Miles de cariños y gracias por conectarte, por participar. Hi, Cathy. I can't hear you.
Sorry.
How are you?
Well, thank you. How are you?
Did you meet Sebastian before?
I think so. Hola, Sebastian.
Oh, sorry, but I don't remember. But nice to see you.
So he's Sebastian, one of the champions, and Leonardo, but we can see him now. He's the president of our Chilean Association of Occupational Therapy.
Oh, hello, Ellen.
Leonardo.
Hello.
Like Da Vinci.
Yes, Leonardo.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, we are ready to start. Thank you so much, Cathy, for coming in the morning and staying the whole session.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
Leo, ¿esperamos o partimos nomás?
Creo que partamos porque ya son las 2 y es que partamos porque igual va a quedar grabado, entonces por la gente hay gente que está temprano
Conectada hace rato, sí. Yo también creo.
Al 49 damos la bienvenida a todos y a todas. En YouTube somos 17 personas. Saludamos ahí, saludos desde Panamá, Jaime, Desiree, María Francisca, bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Yo voy a estar atento a las preguntas, cualquier inquietud que tengan, por favor, que nos escriban por YouTube. Así que eso, bueno, los dejo. Estaré atento a YouTube.
Gracias, Seba.
Gracias, Seba. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas todos, colegas. Bienvenidos a los 56 participantes que ya tenemos en plataforma Zoom. Bienvenidos a los colegas que están actualmente actualmente en YouTube. Preguntas y respuestas las pueden ir dejando acá abajo dentro del panel, pero también la Jenny, quien quiera preguntar directamente a Cathy, también puede levantar la mano para que Jenny le dé acceso al micrófono y a la cámara para que le pregunte directamente a Cathy. Hoy día contamos con la doctora Cathy McBryde, que nos va a hablar de motivación, teoría de la autodeterminación y la medida canadiense del desempeño ocupacional, la cual vamos a tener una presentación de YouTube de aproximadamente 40 minutos y luego vamos a hacer un plenario de discusión.
Excelente. Muchas gracias, Leo. Gracias, Sebastián. Gracias al Colegio de Terapeutas Ocupacionales que nos ha apoyado durante todas estas sesiones de webinars. Y bueno, como Leo ya dijo, Cathy McBryde es investigadora y docente de la Universidad de Queensland. Y tiene más de 30 años de experiencia profesional, particularmente en el área de pediatría. Entonces, la presentación que hoy día nos va a mostrar es acerca de la teoría de autodeterminación y cómo esto tiene un gran impacto con la motivación y cómo usamos nosotros como terapeutas ocupacionales la motivación para enganchar a los participantes. Le voy a explicar a Cathy ahora. Cathy, I was just introducing you and saying, talking about your curriculum and saying that you will be talking about the self-determination theory. So at the end, when we finish the presentation, we will open some videos for people that want to ask you something, that ask questions. We have 65 people here in Zoom and around 15 or 20 in YouTube, but we were just talking if we should wait a little bit because it's a very Latin American way to come late.
A little bit later. Yes,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay.
Jenny.
Okay, I will start then.
Okay.
Ok, vamos a empezar entonces. El video dura 40 minutos y está subtitulado. Ya, les pido por favor que me avisen si es que no se ve bien. Y muchas gracias a todos.
Buenas noches, Fanny.
¿Se ve bien ahí?
Sí.
Súper.
Ya. Vamos a darle entonces. Yep. Ya. ¿Se sigue viendo bien, cierto?
Sí.
Three.
Buenas noches, everyone. Hello. Lovely to be with you this evening. It's a great pleasure for me to have been asked to present this lecture for you, talking about motivation and self-determination theory. I think it's something that we as occupational therapists think about a lot, is how to motivate our clients and get the best outcomes from them when they come to see us in therapy sessions. I know as a clinician in my own private practice, it was something I was always asking myself, was how can I engage these families? How can I motivate them? Often we think about compliance. How do we get our clients and our patients to practice the things that we suggest to them when they come to see us? And so motivation is a really key and important thing for us to consider as occupational therapists. So when we think about the definition of motivation, it's essentially the reason or the reasons that someone has for acting or behaving in a particular way. So the general desire or the willingness of someone to do something, and essentially it provides the purpose or the psychological cause of an action. So the reason that we actually are invested in doing something. The next slide. So motivation is actually a critical determinant of functioning and achievement. It provides us with the incentive to actually act, and motivation is key or essential to learning new skills. We need to be motivated in order to actually strive to gain knowledge and to acquire skills. Next slide, Jen. So it's something, as I said early on, that we often think about as occupational therapists, that motivation for the children we see and their families, it can be a very challenging thing for us. How do we motivate people to engage in therapy? How do we ensure that our clients comply with our home programs and our recommendations? What do we do to make sure that we're getting the best outcomes and the best performance for the children that come to see us? Next slide. So one way that we can think about motivation, is to look at self-determination theory. And this is really helpful for us, I think, as occupational therapists, that helps to answer those questions that I just raised about motivation. So self-determination theory is one of the theories of motivation and personality, and it's concerned with what motivates us to make the choices we make and the degree to which behavior is self-motivated and self-determined. Next slide, Jenny. So self-determination theory is based on the work of Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, and these two psychologists did a lot of research into extrinsic and intrinsic motivation and the differences between the two. Next slide. So self-determination theory states that motivation is defined as a continuum. So we can start off on the left here with complete amotivation or lack of motivation, no motivation to do anything whatsoever. And then along the continuum, if we think about the continuum moving to the right in the direction of that arrow, in terms of what's more effective motivation. So we have lack of motivation completely there on the left, and then extrinsic motivation, which is controlled by external factors. So I'll explain these shortly, but motivation that comes from outside us. And then the most motivation, or the biggest form of motivation, is intrinsic motivation. So it's motivation that's autonomous. It comes from within or inside of us. And it's the most powerful type of motivation. So how do we actually, our understanding really helps us to work with our families in a way that maximizes their intrinsic motivation. And I'll explain this now. So the next slide, Jenny. So if we look at extrinsic motivation, firstly, this is motivation where external controls really influence our performance. So we are motivated by things outside of us, as I said, and the motivators might be tangible motivators. So things like physical rewards, money. We might be motivated in our job because we are paid, and that's very motivating, but we might not like the job too much. We might also be motivated by physical rewards like actual bonuses or prizes, success, recognition, job satisfaction, that they can be tangible external motivators. But external motivation can also be intangible. So this is sort of that social approval that we achieve from other OTs, other occupational therapists, or from the parents of the children we work with, or from our friends. So they can be sort of positive, intangible motivators, external motivators, but also things like deadlines. We can be very motivated to complete a task because we have to submit it, or there'll be consequences, or there may be actually threats as well. You might lose your job if you can't get something done in a certain period of time, and that's an extrinsic motivator. It's not something that we potentially value ourselves, but we are motivated to achieve an outcome because there is some sort of consequence outside of us if we don't. On the other hand, we have intrinsic motivation here, which, as I said, is a much more powerful motivator. And this is where the internal controls influence our performance. So this is about what we are internally motivated to do. So behavior is, when we are intrinsically motivated, behavior is self-initiated and self-directed. And there are high levels of spontaneity and excitement and confidence and persistence when we are intrinsically motivated to do something. And I really love this little illustration here, which it just indicates, I think, exactly what intrinsic motivation is about. It's about grabbing hold of what's in our hearts, what it is that we really want and desire to do. It's not about the external motivators like the money or the prizes or the accolades, the stars. You know, it's nothing to do with those extrinsic motivators. It's all about what motivates us from our heart. And that's the most powerful motivator of all. So Ryan and DC's work in this area is really helpful for us as occupational therapists, because we now know that the strongest motivator for us personally, but also for our families and for our children, is intrinsic motivation. And how do we do that as occupational therapists? How do we ensure that what we are doing with our families and with the children we work with is intrinsically motivating to them? Because we know that they're going to have the best outcomes if we can incorporate a level of intrinsic motivation into our therapy sessions with them. So next slide, please, Jenny. So we know that to be intrinsically motivated, we need to have 3 basic and universal psychological needs met. This is really important, and I love this because these needs are universal, meaning that every person in the world experiences the same needs. It doesn't matter what language we speak, it doesn't matter what we believe in terms of our faith or our culture. We all, every single person in this world has the same 3 universal psychological needs. And so it unites us. And I think this makes it so beautifully simple, really, in terms of occupational therapy practice. We can't go wrong if we always think about these universal needs when we're working with our clients. And the needs are, and I'll talk about these in a bit more detail, but the 3 universal needs are autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And if we ensure that each of these needs are met when we're working with our clients, we will have achieved intrinsic motivation for them. So next slide, please, Jenny. So if we look at what each of these means, autonomy, firstly, is that need to explore interests and experience a sense of personal control. So we are very motivated by the feeling of ownership and the freedom of choice. Autonomy is about being able to choose what we do with our lives and how we do it. It gives us a sense of control. It gives us a sense of agency. I really like that word, agency, meaning that we have a level of control over what it is we do. And autonomy is a really big, important factor in terms of motivation. And it's different to independence. When I graduated as an occupational therapist 30 years ago, we were very focused on trying to maximize the independence of our clients, to make them as independent as possible. And what we were missing was that the importance of autonomy as opposed to independence. So that ability for facilitating the ability of our clients and our patients to actually choose for themselves what's important for them, and not assume that we understood that or knew what that meant. So I guess focusing on independence without thinking about what was important to our client was actually limiting our clients considerably. And so autonomy is so much more than independence. And it's a very important consideration when we're thinking about internal or intrinsic motivation and what motivates people. The second universal psychological need is about relatedness, and this is our need to feel connected to others. So that genuine desire to connect with people, to feel respect in a relationship, and to experience empathy and engagement with others. And that sort of relationship is another very intrinsically motivating factor for all of us. And the third one in terms of competence is that need to feel confident to pursue challenges. So experiencing a sense of mastery over our environment. If I'm not very good at golf, I wish I was better, but I'm not very good at golf. And so because I don't feel very competent, I'm not very motivated to go and play golf, even though my husband loves it and he would like me to play with him. So if we don't feel competent in the work we do, our motivation decreases. And that's that's the third key component of intrinsic motivation is for our clients and our children to feel competent and for us to scaffold what we do with them in order to help them to achieve that feeling of confidence and competence. And we know that from studies that have been done with children with cerebral palsy, for example, that children who have a higher level of mastery over their environment actually have much better social and recreational participation, and they have fewer activity limitations. So if they experience that competence, then they're much more likely to have better outcomes in terms of their engagement in their life and their ability to participate in their life choices. Next slide, please, Jenny. So self-determination theory proposes that if we attend to all of these basic psychological needs, if we actually recognize their importance and we ensure that we address competence and relatedness and autonomy for our children and for our families, then we are going to facilitate our children's motivation through our occupational therapy sessions. So when all those needs are met, it tends to result in an increased interest and excitement and confidence in our children and in our families. And the outcome of that is better well-being, enhanced performance, heightened creativity, and increased persistence. Next slide, please, Jenny. So how do we meet these three universal needs in our therapy sessions? Well, firstly, with autonomy, we can actually engage in collaborative goal setting with parents and children. And what this does is provide our families and the children, if they're old enough to participate in this process, it provides them with some choice and control in therapy. And that's a really helpful and powerful way that we can promote autonomy for them, choice, control, some agency over what they're doing and their contribution to the therapy decisions. In terms of relatedness, it's really important for us to develop rapport and a close relationship with the parents and the children we're working with. So just to develop that therapeutic alliance and partnership with them is really important. So the therapy becomes a collaboration. It's not about us as OTs being the expert and telling them what it is that they need to do. We're actually collaborating with our families and with the children in order to ensure that their needs are identified and that we are working directly with them to achieve the goals that are important to them. And then thirdly, competence. We can enable this in our clients, in our children and our families by enabling success. So we want to scaffold everything we do for the families and for the child in a way that enables and facilitates success, an experience of goal achievement. That's a really important aspect of it. We want them to feel competent, because if they don't feel competent, then they won't feel motivated. They won't continue to push hard, to try hard and harder to get to achieve their goals. Next slide, please, Jenny. So the ways that occupational therapists have actually achieved this, the types of strategies that they've used are things like joint goal setting. This is a very powerful tool, and I'll talk about a lovely assessment that assists us to do this. It's called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, and I'll talk about that in a lot more detail shortly. So joint goal setting is really powerful. We can check parental expectations at the beginning of the session. So ask them about what their goals are, what aspects of occupational performance have been very challenging for them, what really creates disharmony and challenge in the home environment. What are the biggest issues that their children are experiencing? What are the parents' concerns? That's the question that I routinely asked in my private practice. Tell me the 3 biggest concerns that you have for your child at this point in time. And often they were really different to what I thought the priorities would be. You know, as an occupational therapist, when I assessed a child, usually in my mind, I would come up with the top priorities according to the assessment results. But I was often surprised by what the parents identified as being their primary concerns. It was usually quite different to the things that I thought were important. So it's really helpful and important from a motivation point of view to really check in with the parents about their expectations of occupational therapy. What do they want out of the sessions? What are their concerns for their children at this point in time? Explaining what we are doing or what we plan to do with the children and why we might be doing that through the session is really important for motivation. And I think really highlights, again, a difference in practice from when I first started working as an OT over 30 years ago. In those days, we tended to separate the child and the parent when we were working with the child, because it was considered that it was easier for the child to concentrate and focus if their parent was not there distracting them. And now we know that in fact it's not helpful at all, because the parent had no idea what it was that we were doing as occupational therapists and could not see the response that their child was making to the types of things that we were doing with the child. So we know now that because of the lovely research that's available to us, that it's far better to have the parent in the session with us while we're working with the child, so that we can talk to them about what it is we're doing and explain why it is we're doing certain things. And of course that will increase motivation because we're working on competence for the child, but also the parent feels more competent in terms of engaging with their child, in terms of understanding what it is that we're doing and what will help them to achieve the goals that are important for them. So explaining what we're doing and why, checking parents' understanding throughout the session. Does that make sense to you? Would you like to have a go at doing that with your child? To build the confidence and competence in the parent is just as important as it is to build confidence and competence in the child themselves. Check in with the parent about their observations. So that when you notice something about what the child is doing, checking with the parent as to whether your observations as the OT are similar to what the parent is seeing at home, because it can vary. Performance in the child can vary substantially across different environments. So that's really helpful to check in with the parent about any differences. And shared problem solving can be so helpful. Just doing some coaching with the parents to assist them to come up with their own ideas. So noticing things about the way the child does something and then saying to the parent, what sorts of things have you found helpful at home? What have you tried so far? Is very empowering for parents and definitely increases motivation because they are contributing to the therapy process. They're actually coming up with ideas to assist their own child. And again, it's really helpful from a competence point of view for them to be able to identify things that have been helpful and to receive some validation for that. And it also really helps, I think, from an occupational therapy perspective to understand how things work for the parents and the child at home, what the routine is like, so that we can embed our suggestions for home program ideas into what is already happening in the home environment. Again, that's going to be very empowering, very helpful for a parent to feel more competent, to feel that they are able to do some of these things, that it's not going to be an extra 30 minutes that they have to find to do a home program that's separate to everything else that goes on at home for them already. But it's something that can be done really simply throughout the course of the day. So if the parent identifies dressing as being a priority and a goal for them, then perhaps we would encourage them to or talk through and coach them about when that could occur, when the practice for dressing could occur, and try and help them to incorporate that practice into the regular rhythm of their day. So shared problem solving is a very powerful motivator, highlighting the child and parent strengths wherever possible. So this is about that relatedness and therapeutic relationship and alliance. So conveying a sense of confidence in them. You've come up with some amazing suggestions and you're already doing some really lovely things at home. How about we try one extra thing and see what that looks like for you, see whether that might make a bit of a difference. And facilitate that informed decision making. So rather than presenting ourselves as the expert with all the answers and making decisions on their behalf, for example, saying things like, "Well, I think what you need to do here is X or Y," really, I guess, focusing on that collaborative relationship and facilitating or coaching them to make decisions. How do you think this might fit into the course of your regular day? What do you think about this suggestion? Is that something that your child would respond to? So really, really being collaborative, I guess, in any sort of interaction with the parent is highly motivating. These strategies were all taken from a lovely journal article published in the Australian Occupational Therapy Journal, and I've got the reference there in case you wanted to follow that up any further. Now we have a wonderful tool. Next slide. Thanks, Jenny. There's a wonderful tool that really helps us when we want to think about collaborative goal setting, and it's called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. And I wanted to give you a little bit of information about how this works because I think it made a huge difference to me as a clinician working in a private practice, and I know it really helped my families as well, parents and children. This is next slide. Thanks, Jenny. It's a tool. It's a standardized assessment measure. It takes probably about 20 minutes, I think, to administer. And I used to incorporate this assessment into my initial assessment process. So right at the beginning, when I first saw my families, I would incorporate this as one of the assessment items. So the administration is quite simple. It's a 5-step process, and essentially it's started by just discussing with the parents and the child, if the child is old enough, what particular problems the children might be having in terms of their occupational performance. So what is challenging for them at the moment? Why have they come to see you? And so once the parents have identified the problems that they're having, the second step is to rate the importance of each of these problems. So the parent or the child, if they're old enough, can rate how important are each of these problems to you on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being least important and 10 being most important. And that way you can get a sense of which issues or problems are the key problems. So it's almost like triaging. You know, parents often have a whole list of things that they're really concerned about, but when they have to rate the importance of the problem, it gives you a really clear idea of what what to focus on, you know, your triaging, what are the critical things here that we need to look at. The third thing then, the third step is just to confirm with the parent based on the ratings that they have given each of the problems, the 3 most important problems for them. Okay, so you just want to confirm that that's what they've identified in their ratings of importance are actually the 3 most important problems. And then for each of those 3 problems, we get the parent or the child, if they're old enough, to rate the child's current performance. So how well is your child able to do these things? And we're rating on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the least the least capable, to 10 being it's really good performance. And we also want the parent and or the child to rate the satisfaction for each of those problems. How satisfied are they with the performance? And again, that's a scale from 1 to 10. So they're not at all satisfied is a 1, up to very satisfied is a 10. So you have not only a rating of performance, how well the child does these particular things, but also how satisfied am I about that. So sometimes in my experience, I've had parents identify a problem. For example, it might be dressing, where the child's performance is really poor. It might be rated a 2. They just can't do very much of it at all. But in terms of satisfaction, the parent might rate it as a 6 or a 7. So they're quite satisfied with that low level of performance. It doesn't matter to them too much that the child can't independently dress themselves. They're quite happy to do that for them at this particular point in time. So that's a very helpful distinction for us to make, because just because the child isn't good at something doesn't mean that we need to focus on it necessarily. And sometimes that can be helpful for the parent to actually realise that, okay, yes, my child isn't very good at dressing, but that's actually not really a big problem for me at this point in time. You know, they're 4 years old, and it's actually quicker for me to dress them myself because that helps me to get out the door faster in the morning. So that's actually not an issue for me at this point in time, and that's okay. So you can see how it's a lovely tool for really talking through what's going on for a family, and how important these things are for them. And it therefore helps us to know what to focus on as OTs. So the 5th step is simply a reassessment of the of all of those things, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, following a period of intervention. And what's lovely about this measure is that we can get a really clear idea of whether there has been improvement in performance, but also in satisfaction, in terms of parental satisfaction and child satisfaction. Because of those ratings from 1 to 10, we can get a really nice sense of the improvements there. Okay, so I think I've really, next slide, thanks Jenny. I think I've really talked through all of these steps, but step 1, when we define the problems in occupational performance, we're really trying to look at what the child needs to do, what the child wants to do, and what the child is expected to do. And so next slide, thanks Jenny. So this is really about defining those problems in occupational performance. So when we do this, we tend to ask the client, the child or the parent, to think about their typical day and describe the things that usually occur for them. And this is really helpful, that just conceptualizing the child's day in a 24-hour period can be so helpful. Things like consideration of sleep, for example, is something that I never used to talk to my parents about. And that bedtime routine, the self-regulation, you know, is the child able to get to sleep? Do they wake during the night? Those types of things can be so helpful to know about. So just asking that simple question, tell me about a typical day for you, and describe the things that usually occur for you. And so when you're documenting those daily occupations, you tend to focus on those 3 occupational performance areas, and this is what's on the assessment form. So it breaks it down into those 3 areas of self-care, productivity, which for our children is obviously about learning or school engagement, and play, and also leisure activities. Now, there can be some crossover with children, obviously, because their productivity in terms of play, which is how they learn about the world, also dovetails in with leisure. So children will play to learn, but they also play for the fun of playing and for leisure. So it's important for us to separate those things out if we need to. And of course, then we also need to ask about what's challenging for the child and for their parents. So next slide, thanks, Jenny. So step 2, as I said, we need to rate the importance to the parent or the child of each of the problems that they've identified. And this helps us to understand the client's priorities. As I said, the client's priorities, your parents' priorities, the child's priorities may not be yours as the OT. And it's so important for us, if we're going to be working to intrinsically motivate our clients, we need to work with the issues that they have identified as important, not the ones that we think are important. If we expect our clients to work with goals that we think are important, then we are relying on extrinsic motivation to motivate our parents and our children. So we're going to be relying more on the use of stickers, perhaps. We're going to be relying on the use of a reward to get the child to engage. We're going to be relying on the parent's desire to please us as an extrinsic motivator, rather than working on what's important for the family, which will be intrinsically motivating. I hope that makes sense. Okay, step 3, next slide, thanks Jenny. So then we need to confirm the 3 problems that are the most important to the client, as I said, so that's done on the basis of your discussions in step 2. And then step 4 is obviously about rating performance and satisfaction for each of those 3 most important priorities. Okay, so performance, how would you rate the activity, the way that you do this activity now? The child's not able to do it at all is a 1, and a 10, the child's able to do it extremely well. How satisfied are you with the way that you do this activity now? I'm not satisfied at all with the way my child does this activity, up to 10 being extremely satisfied. And so those scores become the baseline against which improvement can be compared. And then you have the reassessment stage. So this is just to obtain your outcome measure, or your measure of how, hopefully, how well performance and satisfaction have improved as a result of your intervention with the child. Okay, so the next slide, thanks Jenny. So the COPM, or the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, has been translated into over 35 languages, and it is available in Spanish. It's not an expensive tool to buy, and it's just, I think, a lovely way that we can work with our families in a way that's very intrinsically motivating in terms of setting goals for them. So I'll give you a quick look at, next slide, thanks Jenny, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, the actual assessment form, which just to give you a little bit of a sense of what it looks like. So this is the front cover here. We just take a few demographic details, date of birth, etc. And then the next page, you can see that it divides it up into those occupational performance areas where you talk through with the parent about the different challenges that they might be having and rate for importance. And you can see that little box on the right there gives you the rating of importance from of 1 to 10. So this little girl, Gracie, had a presentation of a hemiplegic cerebral palsy, and she was having a lot of difficulty using her right arm. Her left arm was unaffected, and she was very good using that arm unilaterally, but she was having a lot of difficulty with tasks requiring the use of the two hands together. So the things that her parents identified, she was only 4, so she didn't participate in this process, but the things that her parents identified as being important in terms of self-care were things like difficulty pulling up pants that were tight, difficulty wiping her bottom after going to the toilet. She was unable to open lunch containers when she was eating her food at school, and she had difficulty putting on shoes and socks by herself. So they rated these things as fairly important, but not really important. They're 4, 3, 4, not of high importance to them. The things that they rated a little more highly were more related to productivity or work, and they more related to her school function. So she was in a prep class, and she was moving into her first year of formal schooling. And so her parents were very concerned about her ability to do things in class that required the use of two hands together. And they were the things that ended up becoming the most important things. So you can see there's a 7 here and a 6. So the ability to use that right hand to grasp objects for play and also for schoolwork, for writing, etc., and the ability to release objects. They were the things that they scored a 7 and a 6, the most important for them. So the next slide, Jenny. So the leisure component of occupational performance, they didn't have any concerns about that area. So there were no particular challenges identified here. And then on the next slide, you can see that with this initial assessment here, the things that they identified as most important, we have listed here. So the things that they wanted her to be able to do a little bit better in terms of the using that right hand were things like putting her shoes and socks on and off. They identified that she was not at all good at doing, not good at doing that at all. So she had a 1 for performance there and a very low level of satisfaction from her parents. They wanted her to be able to do that a little bit better. Opening containers, lunch containers, again, she was a little bit better at that, scored a 5, but and they were reasonably satisfied with her performance. She scored a 4 for that. Things like cutting with scissors, she scored a 3 on performance. So again, a low level of performance, and they were not at all satisfied with how well she was able to cut with scissors. So what you get after you've scored the performance and the satisfaction for each of those challenges that have been identified, you get an overall score. And so what that means is that on reassessment in step 5, which is on the right-hand side here, you would score the performance and the satisfaction again and get an overall score for performance and satisfaction, which will hopefully give you an indication of how much Gracie has improved over time as a result of your occupational therapy intervention. So a very useful tool that really helps us focus in on our clients' goals and also internal motivation. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Estimados colegas, a los que han ido levantando la mano les vamos a ir dando acceso al micrófono para que vayan haciendo sus preguntas. Me parecía una persona. Jenny, ¿te parece alguien a ti?
No, nadie. No hay ninguna pregunta. Hoy
Y
está
en
un poquito
YouTube
más tiempo.
tampoco.
Y
Hay
en
un
YouTube,
espectador que levantó la mano, pero no me parece. Acá está, la Vivian Neumann. Dale, Vivian.
¿Sí se escucha?
Sí, súper.
sí,
Ya. No era yo, pero la levanté ahora. Más que una pregunta, es un comentario. Bueno, buenas noches a todos. Hi, Kath. Nice to see you and listen to your presentation. Lo importante que es todo lo que dijo Kath ahora, tanto lo de la motivación intrínseca, extrínseca, como, bueno, yo soy una amante del modelo canadiense, así que me parece que este instrumento es maravilloso. Y coincido con ella en que a través de los años uno ha ido modificando su práctica. Yo recuerdo, y no quiero aburrirlos con esto, pero hace muchos años atrás haber atendido a un niño con parálisis cerebral y el objetivo era que pudiera ir a hacer pipí solo. Y estábamos trabajando en eso cuando de repente el niño me dice: Vivi, yo estoy súper agradecido de que tú estés tratando de ayudarme en esto, pero la verdad a mí no me interesa. Y hasta ahí nomás llegó el objetivo, que en realidad, como bien decía Kath, era un objetivo mío y no era un objetivo del niño, sí de la familia, pero no del niño, que en ese momento tampoco era tan pequeño, tenía 10, 11 años. Eso, agradecer mucho. No sé, Jenny, si puedes traducir todo lo que dije. Muchas gracias.
Linda, gracias. Cathy, she said that she wanted to say thank you, and like she thinks about the importance of what you said. She loves also the Canadian model and the Canadian method as well. And she recognizes that she has changed the way of practice as well, as you described. So she was sharing an experience that she had with a child with cerebral palsy that was between 10 and 11 years old. And the aim of the therapy was helping him to wee by himself, going to the toilet by himself.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the intervention, the boy said, okay, I am really grateful that you are helping me with that, but I don't care about it.
Yeah.
So she had to change the intervention.
Yeah.
So that was her comment, like how valuable is to discuss this kind of stuff.
Yes. It's something that we ask ourselves so often, I think, isn't it? That whole issue of motivation. And I've had parents bring children for handwriting, for example, and the parent is really upset that the child's handwriting is so messy, but the child themselves they don't care about their messy handwriting, and nor does their teacher. So it's one of those things, I think, that is helpful to focus on. Saves us a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Cathy dijo que esto es una situación que frecuentemente nos encontramos en la práctica, en que nos encontramos con objetivos distintos. Por ejemplo, que ponía el ejemplo de que los padres, por ejemplo, estaban preocupados porque la escritura del niño era súper desordenada y como poco prolija, pero en realidad al niño no le importa y al profesor tampoco le importa. Entonces son cosas que por eso es importante también, para mantener la motivación, fijarnos en lo que el niño quiere.
Jenny, hay otra pregunta puntual respecto a la medida canadiense. ¿Cada cuánto se aplica la reevaluación? ¿Existe algún protocolo?
Cathy, how often we should apply the COPM as an outcome measure, like as a reassessment during the process? How often?
I think not too often. You know, I think it would be counterproductive to do it too regularly, because you want to actually leave enough time to assess whether your intervention has worked. So I think if you're going to do some treatment with the child that over a period of time, usually a few months, then I think 3 to 6 months is a good time. If you're working with them long term, though, you could do it 12 monthly. That would be fine as well. But I think 3 to 6 months is a good period.
Thank you. dice que no demasiado frecuente, que hay que dejar un tiempo suficiente para que el niño aprenda lo que está siendo entrenado, entonces que en general debiese ser entre 3 y 6 meses, y para los pacientes que están trabajando como en objetivos a largo plazo, cada 12 meses.
Ok. Y Paula Torrico, ¿tienes acceso al micrófono? Adelante.
Y al video también, Paula, si quieres prenderlo.
No sé dónde está. Ah, ahí está.
Hay una camarita por ahí.
¿Dónde está la cámara? No la veo. Bueno,
Ya,
pero
No
no,
importa.
no se están perdiendo nada en todo caso. Bueno, primero que nada agradecerles, pero profundamente, todo este ciclo de conferencias, charlas que nos aportan muchísimo, y muy contenta de verdad de...
Paula, perdimos tu audio.
No, estamos escuchándola.
¿Se escucha,
Or
Jenny?
it's me, perdón.
¿Ahí sí o no? ¿Sí?
¿Se escucha,
Hola,
Paula?
Leo.
Dale.
Escuchamos muy bien.
Fundamentalmente, como le digo, primero que nada agradecerles que vengan desde, entre comillas, vengan desde tan lejos a enseñarnos. Y por otro lado, un poco preguntar cómo lo aplican esta motivación, este modelo de motivación en adultos. Yo trabajo en salud mental, y bueno, a veces claramente atendemos a adolescentes, pero en otras oportunidades son adultos. Hay redes, pero muchas veces no son tan eficientes ni tan dispuestas a colaborar. Entonces, ¿cómo lo aplican ustedes en adultos y de una área muy diferente? Muchas veces los pacientes piensan que tienen un desempeño deficiente, pero tampoco tanto. Entonces, desde ahí, de esta mirada tan diferente como puede ser en un aspecto de un desempeño ocupacional, que a veces no lo perciben, ¿ya? Que es tan deficiente. Y por otro lado, yo sí comparto plenamente que en otro aspecto, la familia, muchas veces nosotros intentamos decirle qué es lo que tienen que hacer con el paciente o qué es lo que deberían hacer, y las familias muchas veces también tienen más respuestas, ¿ya? De lo que, o saben mejor que nosotros cuáles son los intereses, las motivaciones del paciente. Entonces, ¿cómo aplicarlo fundamentalmente en el área de salud mental con adultos?
Cathy, her name is Paula. She said that she is deeply thankful for all the webinars, and like we are coming from very far away to share the presentations. And her question is how to apply the COPM with mental health with adults, because this is her field of work. She's working mainly with adults in mental health, but also like not often with adolescents. So sometimes she said that there are not many, the clients don't have networks that are efficient and neither willing to help to support the client. And sometimes the adults perceive that their performance is not as bad as it really is. And she shared with you, like many times we tell the family what to do and how to do it, but they know better than us how to do it at home, and they know really well the client's interest and motivation. So this is the question. How do you apply the COPM with adults in mental health?
Yes, it's a really good question, and it's an area that I have never worked in. I think theoretically it should work really well for any population of people, I think, but it may be for some people that perhaps don't have the same level of insight perhaps about their performance. It might be helpful to try and have a support person with them, a bit like working with a child and having the parent. I think that could be very helpful as well. You know, you would obviously ask the adult what their goals were and how important they were, and how satisfied they were with their performance, etc. But I think if there was any concern about the person's capacity to accurately engage in that process. I think it's always useful to have a support person of some kind, perhaps a family member or a friend. And even if it's just someone to say, actually, I think you do that a lot better than you do. My perception is different to yours, you know, just to get a little bit of a different opinion, perhaps, perspective.
Yeah. Okay, Cathy, I would like to ask you as well. We are presenting like the COPM applied to the pediatric case, but can you explain, please, like how is used in OTs generally? Like because I understand that I have seen like the COPM applied here with people with arthritis and like a big.
Yes.
So wait, I will translate first what you said. Sorry.
Of course.
Yeah, Paula. Dijo que era una súper buena pregunta, que ella en particular no había trabajado con adultos en salud mental y que en realidad si es que el paciente no tenía nada de insight, era un poco trabajar como con un niño, porque no tienen mucha conciencia como del desempeño y si tampoco tienen claras sus motivaciones y esas cosas. Entonces como similar al abordaje que uno tiene con los niños en términos de buscar alguien de apoyo o una persona de referencia con la quien trabajar como parte de la red. Y siempre evaluar, por supuesto, que como para poder evaluar qué tan satisfechos están o qué tan importante es esa meta ocupacional para las personas. Y también si es que uno está preocupado de que ellos no puedan como participar o como enganchar y tener un desempeño adecuado en el uso de la medida canadiense. Y ahora yo le pregunté, porque en mi experiencia acá, yo lo que he visto, ahora estamos dando un ejemplo de pediatría, porque Cathy es del área pediátrica, y bueno, también por el impacto que yo soy del área pediatría, entonces quizás tengo más relación con la gente con niños, pero yo he visto acá aplicar la medida canadiense y a los alumnos trabajar en la medida canadiense con pacientes con artritis adultos, en el área de psiquiatría, bueno, esas simulaciones he visto en esas áreas, y eso es lo que le pregunté a Cathy. Ok, Cathy, you can reply now. Sorry.
Jenny, en relación al chat también preguntan respecto al curso de vida. ¿La medida canadiense está estandarizada para qué tipo de población? En edades.
Yeah, Cathy, this question is related to what I asked you. So they said that in which type of population the COPM is standardized to, like in the lifespan, with which age break can you apply the COPM, and from which age?
My understanding is across the lifespan. So with obviously you can't do it with small children because they're too little to understand the language involved in setting goals and identifying satisfaction and that sort of thing. But you can use it for children if you involve the parent in that process. So my understanding is that it's across the lifespan. You can use it with any of our clients, any condition. You may need to involve a support person, for example, to assist, as we were just discussing, for mental health reasons or other reasons the child is too young. But yes, there's no limit as far as I'm aware on the type of condition or the age. And it would just be, I think that the COPM can easily be incorporated into that initial assessment process. So it just becomes a part of the information gathering component of OT process, you know, when we're initially meeting the families or the client and talking to them about what's important to them, and the COPM could easily be done in that initial assessment stage, I think. Does that answer the question, Jenny?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you so much, Cathy.
Yeah.
Cathy, perdón, voy a contestar.
Dale tú, Jenny, por favor.
Antes que se me vaya la idea, perdón, es que no me da para tanto el cerebro. Cathy dice que se aplica a lo largo del curso de vida y que en realidad la única condición que hay que tener en consideración, y si es que los niños son muy pequeños o en el caso, como discutíamos, por ejemplo, de pacientes con alguna condición de salud mental que no sean capaces de participar por sí mismos, o también, por ejemplo, en el área cognitiva, en donde uno va a buscar una persona de apoyo que pueda colaborar con esta situación, pero lo que ella entiende es que no, el COPM se puede aplicar a todas las áreas de intervención y a todos los tipos de condiciones de salud. Entonces no hay limitaciones respecto de eso, y que el COPM puede ser, esta medida canadiense puede ser fácilmente integrada dentro del proceso inicial de intervención, en donde uno conoce a la familia en esta reunión inicial, para saber qué cosas les interesan y qué problemas tienen, como que sea parte de la evaluación, de la evaluación rutinaria que uno hace con los pacientes. Seba.
Ya tengo una pregunta aquí de YouTube, de parte de Luis Vázquez de Temuco, de la profesor, y no me siento con la competencia como para traducirlo, pero dice, ¿cómo evalúan el involucramiento o el engagement? Porque entiendo que son dos conceptos muy similares, pero no es lo mismo concretamente.
Sí.
Pero la pregunta dice, ¿cómo evalúan el involucramiento o engagement?
I don't know why. Sorry. I was pressing a wrong button and I couldn't hear my computer. Sorry, Cathy, it's my dyspraxia. So there is another question from Luis Vázquez. He's from Temuco, from the south of Chile, and he's asking, how can you assess engagement? And the ability to, well, the problem, Cathy, is we don't have the word engagement in Spanish.
Yes.
So we were talking just a kind of relationship, or the way how you participate. But he was saying he understands that it's not the same concept, engagement and kind of participation, or the way how you establish a relationship. So how do you assess engagement?
Yes, I think that's a really good question and a very difficult thing to assess. I know one of our students, well, sorry, she now has her PhD. Rachel Dorigo has done a PhD in this area, and talked about the key for engagement, and self-determination and motivation is one aspect of that. I'm just trying to think of the other elements that were associated with engagement, but I'm not sure that there's an actual assessment of it. I think it's one of those things that's very difficult to gauge, and we don't have any real objective way of assessing it, I don't think. Rachel has attempted to identify the components of engagement in her PhD. But yes, I don't think we have an actual assessment of it. I think the way to try and increase engagement is to focus in on internal motivation, and the COPM is just one way, I guess, that we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Luis, Cathy dice que es una muy buena pregunta y es una difícil pregunta de responder, que en realidad es un área más o menos como novedosa también, y como que está recién siendo investigada en terapia ocupacional a nivel mundial. Y ella hablaba de Rachel Darrigo, que es una colega australiana que acá el año pasado terminó su PhD e hizo el PhD en engagement. Entonces, en el artículo que Cathy publicó, que mostró en la presentación, identificaron como las cosas claves que te demuestran que el paciente logra este engagement, que es más que la vinculación, que es más que la participación y el compromiso, es como además la adherencia al tratamiento y todo ese tipo de cosas. Entonces decía que hasta el momento no tenemos ninguna evaluación formal como una pauta estandarizada para evaluar engagement, pero que sin duda una de las cosas que son importantes para aumentar el engagement es la motivación interna, o cómo nosotros usamos la motivación intrínseca del paciente para participar en la terapia.
Paulina Molinari, tienes acceso al micrófono para que lo actives.
Hola, buenas noches.
Hola, Pauli.
Hola Jenny, una vez más muchas gracias por esta experiencia, ha sido muy enriquecedora. Tengo dos preguntas, ¿ya? Una es sobre si nos puede compartir la experiencia de ella en aplicación de este trabajo con niños con trastorno del espectro autista que de repente tienen intereses bastante poco funcionales y que no tampoco les falta el insight para poder darse cuenta de de su poco encaje en el entorno. Eso sería una pregunta. Y lo otro es cómo es la experiencia allá sobre la aceptación de este método de trabajo con respecto a otros miembros del equipo interdisciplinario. Porque nosotros en Chile la realidad a veces que, bueno, casi siempre trabajamos dentro de un equipo en donde hay otro modelo de trabajo mucho más biomédico, muchas veces, mucho más que nosotros dirigimos a la familia y dirigimos al entorno. Entonces, me gustaría, ¿cómo es la experiencia de allá? Si esto se aplica también, hay médicos que lo aceptan o también cuesta, así como acá, me encantaría poder conocer la experiencia. Eso, y muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Pauli. Cathy, she said that she's very grateful and thank you so much for this enriching experience. She was asking, perdón, Pauli, es una súper buena pregunta porque Cathy, una de las áreas de expertise es en autismo. Es como maestra de la intervención con autismo, así que bueno, muy buena pregunta. I was just saying that you are so expert in working with children with autism. So her question, Cathy, is what is your experience in working with children with in the autism spectrum disorder? Because often they have interests that are not very functional, and also they lack of insight about like what should be important. So what is your experience? This is the first question. And the second question is, how is your experience in terms of using this way of thinking and working with the medical team, like the health team? Because she was saying that in Chile we have, I guess I could say in Latin America, we have a different way of working as a team. So the biomedical perspective is much more prevalent, and we direct and lead the family and say what they should do, what are the goals for the intervention. So, and she was asking if in the Australian experience, how that works, if it's difficult for you to work in this way, if the rest of the team is not working in the same way.
Definitely. I might answer that second question first, if that's okay.
Yes.
I agree. I think that's very challenging because if you're working in a medical team, and particularly in a hospital environment, you know, if you or an acute setting, you have very specific outcomes that you need to meet, don't you? I mean, you have to get those children out of hospital quickly. You have to keep them out of hospital. Sometimes it's just not possible to work on people's goals. You know, you actually have a bigger medical goal to achieve because of the commitment that you have to the medical team that you're working with. And so that's very challenging, I think. In those circumstances, I think OTs can still identify in a more informal way, perhaps, what's important for that person. I'm just trying to think of an example, but if you were doing, would it be stroke rehab, Jenny? Something like that?
Yeah.
So there would always be, I think, a way to identify what was important to that patient or that client. So if part of the focus was on improving range of motion or reducing tone, etc., I think we can still always incorporate a little functional goals into that particular into that focus. So it might be that the person wants to get back to work, or they need to be able to do things at home. And so I think there's always capacity to sort of build in a little bit of that internal motivation and still meet the obligations of the rehabilitation team or the medical team.
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
will
not sure.
translate.
It's hard to know how, you know, the exact context in which they work. That's tricky, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think, Cathy, the change, if I don't know if you agree, I can say that, but
Yeah.
I think the change is that here, the client-centered practice
Yeah.
movement is
Yeah.
teaching everyone in the health team to consider the client and their interest and their motivation. So it's a kind of, you are not fighting yourself as an OT.
Yes.
It's the whole system that is working in a kind of client-centered way, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. And it's taken a while to shift in that direction. I think, I think I'd say baby steps, you know, just go really gently and very slowly and just start to introduce a little bit more of that client-centered practice, but still honor the system in which you have to work in, you know, that medical system.
How long do you think it has taken for Australia?
Oh gosh, at least a decade, at least. You know, it's a slow burn.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, that transition.
I will translate that and then you can respond about the autism.
Yeah.
Ya, ella, Pauli, dice que está de acuerdo contigo y que es un tremendo desafío. Perdón, va a responder primero la segunda pregunta y después la del autismo. Que es un tremendo desafío en trabajar como con el equipo médico y en particular en un ambiente hospitalario o en áreas de pacientes como en condición crítica y aguda, porque a veces la tarea es dar de alta luego al paciente en lugar de enfocarse como en cosas funcionales. Entonces, a veces simplemente no es posible el poder ocupar como este enfoque, considerar los intereses del paciente y eso, y en realidad uno tiene que responder como a este desafío o como a esta tarea que es más grande en términos médicos, porque está en riesgo el paciente o por la condición de salud. Y que ella cree que aun cuando es desafiante, los terapeutas ocupacionales podemos identificar de algunas maneras informales qué es lo que es importante para el paciente. Entonces ponía el ejemplo de pacientes con post-accidente vascular, en donde siempre habían, aun cuando uno tuviera que trabajar, por ejemplo, en mejorar el rango de movimiento o el tono muscular, aún uno podría encontrar metas que son funcionales, como si el paciente hay aspectos que quisiera trabajar para volver al trabajo o volver a funcionar en su entorno del hogar. Entonces siempre hay alguna como capacidad que desarrollar en el paciente y sobre todo el buscar la motivación interna o intrínseca del paciente para poder abordar en esto. Yo le preguntaba, le decía que en mi percepción, acá en Australia hay la práctica centrada en el cliente, que es lo que hemos trabajado, lo que hemos conversado en los webinars anteriores y que es como un cuerpo de conocimiento gigante, que yo diría que es igual que la práctica basada en evidencia e igual que el mundo del conocimiento de la práctica centrada en la ocupación. Es algo que está de moda, empezó a estar de moda hace 20 años a nivel mundial, y decía que acá en Australia, ella diría, porque estaba de acuerdo conmigo en que este tema del equipo de trabajo es que este movimiento de la práctica centrada en el cliente no solo ha guiado a los terapeutas ocupacionales a trabajar de esta forma, sino que al team completo. Entonces, ya hay una sensibilización que no tiene que ver que solo nace de TO, sino que es como la moda de la intervención en salud y en rehabilitación contemporánea, que hace que el resto del equipo médico también piense de esta manera. Entonces no es como una guerra que estamos dando solo. Y yo le preguntaba cuánto más o menos ella creía que esto le había tomado a Australia, y me decía que ella creía que más o menos, al menos 10 años, en el cambio del proceso, en que todo el equipo médico ha tenido una mirada distinta de tener al paciente al centro y de considerar sus motivaciones e intereses y no ser nosotros quienes establezcamos las metas de tratamiento para ellos. Ok, Cathy, now you can... ¿Sí?
Dani Bajo pregunta, ¿qué pasa cuando los padres están involucrados y cómo podemos ocupar la COM para que se involucren los profesores del niño?
Ya.
Dos preguntas.
Vamos a hacer esa pregunta de la Dani y después contestamos lo del autismo, que quedó pendiente.
Okay.
Cathy, the question is, if you have applied the COPM with the teachers that sometimes are referring the child from the school, and she said, and it would be interesting to use this methodology to identify priorities in the teachers' concerns to increase the motivation of the students
Yeah.
and work in a context that is more successful.
Yes, yes. I think that's a wonderful idea. It's got such broad application. You know, we've used it with OTs as well, haven't we? So
Yes.
it has a wonderful broad application. It's not just for our clients or the parents of our clients. You know, you could easily use it with teachers and other health professions, even in a more informal way. You wouldn't perhaps have to do the whole formal process, but yeah, it's got great application.
Thank you, Cathy. Dice Cathy que es una maravillosa idea la que propone Daniela y que en realidad es lo bueno de la medida canadiense, es que tiene como una aplicación súper amplia a todas las áreas y que fácilmente se puede aplicar con los profesores o a otros profesionales de salud de manera más informal. No quiere decir que uno vaya como paso por paso siguiendo el manual de la pauta, pero que sí se puede aplicar, y ella ponía el ejemplo. En el contexto de mi doctorado, nosotros hemos estado haciendo un proyecto con 6 chilenos durante el último año y hemos usado la medida canadiense para aplicarla a los terapeutas ocupacionales que están trabajando con nosotros, para entender las motivaciones de ellos para trabajar en nuestro proyecto. Entonces, para que como que se entienda el contexto, es una medida que podríamos aplicar a cualquier área. Y antes que haga la siguiente pregunta, le voy a pedir a Cathy que responda lo de autismo, de la Pauli Molinari, ¿ya? Cathy, now can we go back please to the question about the autism and how do you, in terms of the interests that are not very functional, and yeah.
Yes, it can be very challenging to motivate children on the autistic spectrum. I have torn my hair out trying to really find things that motivate them, and I think that's where I perhaps didn't do so well, was because I was focusing on extrinsic motivation, you know, trying to find something that was motivating for them outside, some reward that would encourage them to do the things that I thought were important for them. I think it's hard, as the OT said, you know, to actually sometimes, sorry, I'll backtrack. I think it's hard for children with autism to often identify or have the insight to identify what's important for them or what's meaningful. I know that it's really important to work with their interests. You know, their interests are very powerful and internally motivating. And so I think we understand that a bit better now. When children used to focus in on their special area of interest, we used to think that was a bad thing and try and direct them away from that. And focus them in on something else that was a little more perhaps socially appropriate or engaging with other people. But I think we recognize now that those special areas of interest that they have are actually what internally motivates them. So we can use those things really effectively in therapy. So if it's a small child with autism and they have a real obsession with cars, for example, then that's what I would use to try and engage them. So if the goal for the parent was to increase play and social interaction, I would use the internal motivator to do that. So if it was cars, if it was some sort of computer game or some interest in Pokemon or something, that's what I would use. I would use the special area of interest or the obsession because that's the internal motivator.
Yeah.
If it was, if I was working with an older child and they were really fascinated by medieval things or Second World War or something, I would use that as the basis upon which to work on handwriting, for example, or composition, essay composition. Does that help answer the question? So I would always actually use their obsessions and interests as part of therapy. Yeah.
So even like trying to use their interest to focus on the functional tasks that maybe are not part of their interest.
Exactly. So if they had come because they were really struggling to organize their thoughts to write a page of writing, write a story, I would use their special area of interest, like The Simpsons, you know, a silly cartoon here, or in America, The Simpsons, or
we have it too.
Histories. Yeah, exactly. It's all over, isn't it? But yes, I had one little boy who loved The Simpsons, so that's what I used to help develop his handwriting skills.
Yeah,
because he was not motivated.
Pauli dice que sí, que ella está de acuerdo contigo que es súper desafiante el poder identificar en los niños con autismo sus motivaciones o tener como motivaciones que son más funcionales, que algunas veces ella se estaba sacando la cabeza pensando cómo poder motivar a estos niños o tirándose el pelo en el contexto latinoamericano, y que siempre se pensó que estas motivaciones o como especiales, intereses especiales o como obsesiones que tienen los niños con particulares cosas era malo y que en la terapia debiésemos alejarlos de eso y buscar algo funcional o algo que fuera como más socialmente apropiado, pero que en realidad actualmente lo que se piensa es que esos intereses son súper poderosos para los niños y por lo tanto en lugar de sacarlos y tirarlos fuera del proceso de intervención, debiéramos considerarlo. Entonces, por ejemplo, daba el ejemplo si es que hay un niño que está obsesionado con autos y la meta funcional, que puede ser no su meta, sino que de los padres o de los profesores, es que el niño que juegue y que sea como socialmente más apropiado y se relacione de manera más apropiada. Entonces ella va a usar los autos como motivación dentro de las actividades para dirigirlo donde queremos en términos funcionales. Lo mismo decía si es que hay niños que están obsesionados, por ejemplo, con juegos de computador, con los Pokémon, vamos a usar ese interés para desarrollar el resto de la actividad. Hablaba de un ejemplo de un niño con autismo más grande, en que el objetivo como de la terapia, porque los papás lo derivaron o porque los profesores lo derivaron, es que pueda mejorar la escritura y escribir, por ejemplo, ensayos. Entonces, si y organizar sus pensamientos para poder escribir una historia. Entonces, lo que va a hacer es que si ese niño, por ejemplo, ya recordaba uno que estaba obsesionado con la Segunda Guerra Mundial, entonces ella usa ese interés de la Segunda Guerra Mundial para desarrollar este otro objetivo funcional. Y lo mismo con los Simpson, que al final, que parecía ser como una serie así como bien chistosa, como a veces poco apropiada, pero que use sus intereses para poder desarrollar la tarea funcional. Eso.
Mariel, te estoy dando acceso al micrófono para que lo enciendas nomás. Y después vendría Francisca Galdames y Mabel Navarrete.
Bueno, creo que ya estoy desmuteada. ¿Cómo les va? Primero que nada, gracias a Cathy por toda la disertación. La verdad que es una manera muy práctica de ver el Copm y como una manera muy amigable de poder utilizarlo. Mi consulta es, volviendo un poco al tema pediátrico, se hacía mucho hincapié en la cuestión de tener en cuenta tanto a los padres como a los niños, en la medida en que puedan expresar su opinión. ¿Qué pensaba mientras decían eso? ¿Qué sucede cuando son los mismos padres quienes no tienen muy en cuenta a los niños? O bueno, tal vez ahí hay un choque de intereses, como uno como terapista puede manejar esa situación. Eso por un lado. Y ahora con esto último que estaban hablando, me surge la idea de si también en cierto modo, tal vez de una manera más, ¿cuál sería la palabra? Generalizada, tal vez, se podría aplicar al Copm en lo que es, nosotros por ejemplo tenemos una de las últimas prácticas en la universidad, que es la intervención de terapia en comunidad. Si se podría también utilizar de alguna manera esta esta medida en este tipo de grupo, ¿no? Población o lo que sea, considerando que a nosotros, por ejemplo, se nos hace mucho énfasis, y es una práctica bastante diferente a todas las anteriores, que como decían, uno está un poco acostumbrado a la cuestión biomédica, o la cuestión de indicar mucho hacia los pacientes, indicar mucho, como que uno está poniendo el foco. En cambio, en la práctica en comunidad, justamente lo que a mí me quedó mucho, que la profesora decía, que era escuchar y acompañar al grupo según sus necesidades, y bueno, uno dentro de la profesión proveerle herramientas para que ellos continúen según sus intereses. Así que esas serían mis dos preguntas.
Muchas gracias, Mariel. Cathy, she said, thank you so much. She's connected from Argentina.
Gosh.
So she said that the way how you presented the COPM was very friendly, and it seems like it's easy to use.
Yeah.
And she said that we were emphasizing the importance of considering and involving the parents and the children during the process. But what happened with the parents that are not very involved with the children or don't have much attachment? So how can you manage that? And the second question is that she has been working in a community practice now, community-based practice. So, and they encourage the students to have to emphasize in how to consider the interest of the community and how to work with them. Yeah. So how can you use this COPM with the community as well?
So the community in terms of the broader community, like
I think a community group.
Yes, community groups. So
yeah.
Swimming club or a ballet class or something.
Yeah.
Right? Is that what
and I think, Mariel, yo no sé si tú puedes clarificar esto, pero yo creo que con la comunidad tú te refieres, por ejemplo, cuando uno trabaja, no sé, con centros de madres o como con centros...
Claro, tal cual, o sea,
nosotros...
Sí, no sé si me escuchan.
Sí.
Sí, o sea, todas nuestras prácticas son basadas en un área u otra, sea físico, mentales. En general el abordaje siempre es más individual. En cambio, en comunidad, obviamente trabajamos justamente en una comunidad, sea acá no sé lo que es un taller protegido, pero bueno, se entiende como comunidad, puede ser un grupo pequeño, como un barrio, puede ser algo más grande, o tal vez una familia es en sí mismo una pequeña comunidad, y bueno, eso es lo que...
Gracias.
Digamos, pero no el abordaje individual de paciente, niño, padre, como esa triangulación, sino tal vez enfocarlo a algo más grande.
Más grande. She's, Cathy, she's thinking about something bigger than just the child and the parents or the small family. She's thinking, she was saying that, for example, in the community practice, they are working with, this is a kind of a protected environment to work for people with disabilities. It's a kind of special organization, or it could be even like a neighborhood or a bigger family, extended family.
Yes. And I guess in that circumstance, it would be, you could use the COPM with the community. I think you could probably, if there were a group of people who were involved in the care of the client or the person, then you could do it with the group. You could meet with that group of people and talk to them about what they felt were important things to work on for that client or for that person. So it doesn't just have to be with one caregiver or with the parent, or it could be done, I think, in a school environment with a group of teachers, you know, a teacher aide and a teacher and a support person. It doesn't have to be done necessarily with, you know, just one person.
Yes.
I think it lends itself beautifully to be done with a team of people. Definitely. If you had a person in supported housing, for example, I'm not sure what the situation is in Chile, but you know, in
Chile we have.
Yeah, you have that. Yeah, so if you've got a group of support workers who are supporting someone to live independently in a home, you know, you could do it with them, I think, and as well as the person. So
and the question was when the parents are not engaged with the child.
Yes, that's right. That's so challenging. It's really, really difficult. I think what's lovely about this is that it can facilitate, because it's actually focused on what motivates the parent, you know, what's important for the parent. That actually can increase engagement in therapy. Just that simple question of saying to them, tell me what's hard for you. Tell me about what you're finding hard or what you're finding challenging, can actually help that parent to engage more with their child, because you're focusing in on what's important for them. So I'm not sure of the circumstances, but yes, the COPM itself could foster, you know, a better connection. But otherwise, I think if you've got a child who's old enough to engage in the process, you can just do it with the child. You don't have to involve the parent. So if the child is, I think, 7 and older, you can just do it with the child themselves if you feel that it's not going to be helpful to engage the parent in the process.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mariel dice que la medida canadiense es súper apropiada y que es como lo bueno que tiene la herramienta, que se puede usar con un grupo de personas y hablar en grupo con ellos para poder, en el caso de las comunidades, poder establecer las prioridades, cómo sienten que se desempeñan como en la percepción y también en la satisfacción. Y que, por ejemplo, en el caso de las escuelas, uno incluso podría aplicar la medida canadiense en un grupo de profesores que sean los que trabajen con el niño. Entonces, con los proyectos de integración, el profesor de la sala, las tutoras o estas tutoras sombras que le llaman, que van con los niños para todos lados, entonces, que es una pauta que se puede aplicar y que se adapta como para aplicarla también a las comunidades. Decía que, me decía que, por ejemplo, en el caso de los hogares protegidos, nosotros en Chile tenemos, no sé si en Argentina o en los otros países latinoamericanos tienen, pero por ejemplo estas casas en donde vive un grupo de pacientes del área de salud mental con un cuidador o con alguien que supervise como desde un centro de salud, que también podría aplicarse con todas las personas que están como en la coordinación y el cuidado de ese hogar protegido. En relación a los papás que no enganchan con el niño, que no están muy vinculados, decía que es muy difícil y que en realidad lo bueno de esta herramienta de la medida canadiense es que facilita enfocarse en las motivaciones y en las necesidades que tienen los padres. Entonces, al discutir con ellos, solo por el hecho de preguntarles qué es lo que es difícil para ti o qué es lo que te desafía o qué es importante, el COPM entrega la herramienta como para favorecer este contacto y esta conexión. Y si es que los padres no están vinculados, uno podría establecer estos objetivos con el niño si es que tiene la edad suficiente, 7 o como más o menos 7 años o más, para poder decidir por sí mismo sus prioridades en la intervención. Eso, no sé si hay alguna otra pregunta. Yo creo que estamos, ¿o no?
Está Mariel, como para cerrar.
Ya. ¿Una pregunta más entonces?
O sea, está Francisca y Mabel.
Ya. Cathy, we have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Hola Jennifer, hola Leonardo, profe Seba.
Hola Francisca.
Hola Cathy. Voy a tratar de hacerla en inglés para que puedas traducir una vez y si no me sale, me ayudas. Hello Cathy, I'm Francisca. I'm a student here in Chile. I'm a student in the University of Chile. I was telling Jennifer I'll try to see if my English comes in handy, so she only has to translate once.
It's very good. It's wonderful.
I had 2 questions. First of all, when applying the COPM to the parents or the caretakers, do you still take the child or the client's interests and priorities into consideration somehow, and how do you do that? And the second question is, when the client is old enough to answer to the COPM, do you see a significant improvement in the child's motivation and engagement through the intervention?
Yes, definitely. I'll answer the second question first. Yeah, I think because it is focused so much on identifying what's important for the child, that really you are tapping into that intrinsic motivation, the internal motivation. It's the what's close to your heart. You know, what is it that you really want to work on? And that's the key thing, I think, to intrinsic motivation. So yes, the answer is yes. You definitely see an improvement in that motivation, engagement, and outcome for the child. In terms of incorporating their interests, I think that's still very, very important, and it kind of dovetails in together really well. So if you can always check in and ask about interests, I think that's another way of tapping into intrinsic motivation. So if you know what their goals are and what's important, but you also know what is of interest to them, you can use the interests to facilitate the goal attainment, really. So I said to Jenny, I was talking to Jenny about the example of a little boy I worked with who loved The Simpsons. So one of his goals was to actually be able to write half a page of essay. And he wanted to, so we were working on that, but I used his interest of The Simpsons to help him to structure an outline for his writing. So a beginning to the story, a middle to the story, an end to the story, and then we used the characters from The Simpsons to help sort of motivate him to do that and increase his interest and engagement in the task.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. I had another question, but I don't know if it's able to answer it, because it was from the beginning when you said that intrinsic motivation had 3 universal principles.
Yes.
I don't know if you have any background on how did the researchers, how are they sure that that's like correct through all cultures? I was wondering, how did they get to that conclusion?
Yes, it's such a good question, and my answer is I don't know. I'm not really sure. I don't have the background in the research to comment on that. I can certainly find out for you, and Jenny, I could let Jenny know. But yes, a lot of research in this area originated from the work of Ryan and DC, who looked at that intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So I couldn't tell you the type of research that was done or how they sort of narrowed it down to those 3 things. I'm sorry, but I can find it for you.
Thank you. Thank you for your class.
That's okay. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. I will translate for the rest. Francisca estaba preguntando que tenía 2 preguntas. Una es que cuando los cuidadores, perdón, cuando uno está haciendo la evaluación con los cuidadores, ¿cómo uno puede igual considerar los intereses del paciente si es que el niño tiene la edad suficiente para responder? Y decía que, Cathy, que como uno se está enfocando en identificar qué es lo que es importante para el niño y usa como la motivación interna del niño y lo que es importante para ellos como en su corazón, uno en definitiva, y la pregunta era si es que realmente uno veía muchas más mejoras cuando hacía esto. Y ella decía que sí, que definitivamente uno veía como muchos mejores resultados de la terapia cuando se consideran las motivaciones del niño y sus intereses. Y que cuando están siendo aplicados por los padres también hay posibilidades de poder considerar dentro de las metas estos intereses para facilitar. Daba el ejemplo de los Simpson, de este niño que tenía que escribir un párrafo, entonces trabajaron juntos en cómo poder organizar las ideas en el inicio, en la mitad, y para finalizar la escritura de este párrafo usando los personajes de los Simpsons. Y luego Francisca preguntó cómo los autores de DC y Ryan que estudiaron que propusieron la teoría de la autodeterminación, cómo ellos llegaron a la conclusión de que estas 3 necesidades básicas son universales y que son las mismas en todas las culturas, en todas las razas, y Cathy decía que en realidad ella no sabía, pero que iba a buscar la información y la iba a compartir. Que no sabía que habían hecho este estudio en motivación extrínseca y intrínseca por años y que iba a buscar la información y la iba a enviar.
Jenny, nos queda la última pregunta de Mabel Navarrete, así que le vamos a pedir a Mabel que active su micrófono para que cerremos hoy día.
Ya. This is the last question, Cathy.
Yeah, that's okay.
Mabel, dale. Ahí estamos.
Sí, hola, buenas noches.
Hola, Mabel.
Hola Jenny, ¿cómo estás? Agradezco mucho la presentación y felicitarla a ti y a todas las terapeutas ocupacionales que han estado acompañándonos y también al colegio terapeuta. Y mi pregunta está relacionada con los home program, que en la evidencia, en las revisiones sistemáticas de tratamiento de niños con parálisis cerebral, está con una alta evidencia. Entonces quería saber cuál es la experiencia que tienen ustedes allá, porque me parece, si no estoy mal, esta charla también estaba relacionada con ese tipo de programa.
Sí, mira, antes de hacerle la pregunta, te voy a contar un poco porque en realidad no introdujimos nada del programa para el hogar y podemos planear una presentación más adelante porque el programa para el hogar, sí, pues inicialmente habíamos pensado en hacer eso y después pensamos que era mejor hacerlo con la medida canadiense porque se relacionaba con el objetivo de la motivación y cómo incorporarlo en la terapia de manera concreta, y lo otro es porque la presentación de Home Program dura como 40 minutos también, entonces se hacía demasiado largo, pero solo para dar contexto, el Home Program, que es lo que aparece como reportado en los artículos, es un programa para el hogar que es como una estructura estandarizada. Entonces compararon cuántas semanas el programa para el hogar debería tener, hasta cuántos objetivos uno debería trabajar. Es como establecer en el fondo como una dosis de la terapia y establecen como cosas concretas para qué es lo que el programa en el hogar debería incluir y cuánto es, digamos, por cuántas semanas, cuánto tiempo, de qué manera. Y yo creo que Cathy tocó algunos aspectos del programa para el hogar porque, por ejemplo, una de las cosas que dicen es poder como meter estas tareas dentro de las rutinas diarias de los pacientes en el hogar. Entonces eso, que podemos ver la presentación algún otro día. Cathy, Mabel's question, she said that she's very grateful for the presentation, thank you so much. And she was asking about the home program, because in the first material that we were publishing, we put home program, self-determination theory and home program, and then we jumped to the other stuff. So I was just explaining a little bit that we didn't talk about the whole home program today and explaining the context of what the home program means, because she was referring to the article, I guess the Yona Novak systematic review that says that the home program is efficient for children with cerebral palsy. Yes. So I was just explaining how the home program is organized and like the evidence that talks about kind of dosage, like how many days, how much time during the day, and this kind of stuff to clarify like what home program is, because we are not familiarized with that in Chile.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she was saying how this presentation and the motivation and everything relates to the home program.
Yes, yes. I think it's really a key component of it, because it's something that I remember as a new graduate OT giving, big home programs, lots of ideas to my families, and then being frustrated because they wouldn't actually do anything at home. They weren't compliant. They weren't actually doing anything. And so, it was a source of great frustration to me. And I think now that I understand more about motivation, I think it works so well together. So if we are focusing in on what's important for the family, so we've identified their goals and their priorities, then
working with them to suggest home program ideas becomes a lot easier, because firstly we know what they want to focus on, so we can really focus in on what's important for them. But the second thing we can do with the home program is incorporate the ideas into we embed it, if that's a better word. I think we embed the ideas for the home program into their everyday lives, so then it becomes easier for them to implement. So instead of doing something for, you know, we say to them, these are the activities you have to do, and you have to do them for 30 minutes, and they have to find 30 minutes in their day. We say to them, these are the types of things that would help you to meet your goal of your child dressing themselves. And I would suggest that you do that in the morning before breakfast, because that's when she would normally be dressing. Practice undressing before the bath at night time. When you come home from school, get changed and undress and put on some different clothes. So the home program becomes embedded in the routine of the day, rather than something separate that is an extra burden for the family. Does that help? So that it's about it's dovetailing in with the I guess the goal setting, but also the things that are intrinsically motivating and meaningful for the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it provides like a beautiful structure and a way to understand, like to have a like a thinking in the dosage in an evidence-based way, rather than just copying what you hear your supervisor saying about the dosage.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Ya, Mabel dice que el programa en el hogar es un componente clave en términos de la motivación, que es que al inicio ella recuerda que en su práctica le entregaba como indicaciones para el hogar a los papás con un montón de ideas, con millones de hojas, y los papás al final no hacían nada de eso en la casa, y que era como una frustración súper grande para ella como terapeuta. Entonces el programa en el hogar trabaja y como se fusiona súper bien con esto primero con la medida canadiense, porque considera los intereses y las prioridades de la familia, pero también con el tema de la motivación. Entonces, a través de este Home Program como programa estructurado para el hogar, se sugieren ideas, y lo más importante es que uno trata de como incrustar o meter estas ideas en las rutinas cotidianas de la familia. Entonces son cosas, y le da sugerencia en relación a cosas que podrían ayudarlos a cumplir sus metas. Por ejemplo, sugerir que el vestuario no lo va a entrenar de manera aislada, sino que lo van a entrenar después de la hora del baño, o cuando se ponen el pijama, o en las mañanas, por ejemplo, antes del desayuno, o que eso, y que como va metido dentro de la rutina de la familia, no se transforma en un peso para ellos, como en un peso extra que tienen que hacer. Y que además, como está basado en un establecimiento de metas que tiene relación con sus intereses, es motivante intrínsecamente. Y lo otro que yo le decía a Cathy es que yo encuentro, para mí que no lo conocía, yo encuentro que el programa en el hogar es una manera súper buena de tomar decisiones y de ofrecer instrucciones para el hogar basados en evidencia, porque es un programa que funciona, que está articulado, que te dice como qué dosis de tratamiento uno le va a dar a los pacientes para la casa, y que en el fondo ha sido probado que funciona, con cuántos números de objetivo uno va a decir, en qué horario lo va a hacer, o cuánto rato durante el día, por cuántas veces, porque en mi experiencia lo que yo hacía antes era como repetir lo que había escuchado de mis colegas con más experiencia, o repetir lo que aprendí en mis centros de práctica de los docentes, como en su rol de experto, pero en realidad decía ya, use esta férula tanta hora al día, o use, no sé, haga esta actividad tantas veces al día, pero sin ninguna base de realmente saber por qué lo estaba diciendo, sino que repetía lo que había escuchado nomás. Así que yo creo que el programa en el hogar nos entrega como una manera de hacer práctica basada en la evidencia súper sólida en términos de cuánto dosis de tratamiento les vamos a entregar. Eso.
Muchas gracias, Jenny. Muchas gracias a Cathy por esta oportunidad de estarla escuchando acá. Agradecer esta cuarta jornada ya. Nos queda una última el día miércoles 2 de septiembre, que vamos a ver entrenamiento en miembro superior, ¿cierto? En hipertonía en miembro superior.
Manejo
Con
hipertonía.
Jody, si no me equivoco, ¿cierto? Y invitar a los colegas también, que mañana va a haber una actividad con el Colegio de Kinesiólogos, que son los consensos de rehabilitación, donde se visualiza la intervención de TO desde UPC hasta que el paciente está en forma ambulatoria. Así que he invitado a todos los colegas mañana a conectarse a las 6 de la tarde a través de la página del Colegio de Kinesiólogos de Chile, y vamos a tener un buen documento bien elaborado, que participaron en este caso alrededor de 8 colegas de Chile en este consenso, así que bienvenidos todos y invitados todos para este evento.
So we have finished, Cathy. Everyone says thank you so much for your generosity in sharing this presentation.
That's my pleasure, my pleasure. And Jenny, I just wanted to say too that the case study that we presented, you know, the COPM with the example of Gracie, just that was a teaching, you know, we'd use that for teaching, not actually based on an actual person. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point as well. Yeah.
Quería clarificar que ese estudio de caso que presentó de Gracie, de la niña con parálisis cerebral, es un caso que usan acá para enseñarle a los alumnos, entonces no es un caso real, es un caso como ficticio, solo para clarificar. Así es que eso, y que es un placer para ella estar con nosotros. Así es que eso, muchas gracias Seba, muchas gracias Leo. Thank you so much, Cathy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Gracias a todos por su participación súper activa, por sus preguntas súper interesantes, y bueno, nos vemos en la próxima, el próximo webinar, que es el último. Así es que muchas gracias a todos.
El último quizás de una tercera generación de webinars, esperemos que venga una cuarta. Gracias, Jenny.
¿Va a tener que dar vitaminas para el cerebro, eso sí, Leo? Porque ya... Y les de cariño.
Gracias a todos los colegas que nos acompañaron. Nos vemos. Chao, chao.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Thank you. I will copy you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Gracias, Seba. Gracias a todos. Chao.
Chao.